Hey guys, this is Voxide, and in this tutorial I'm gonna show you an example of how to create a scene using Sci-Fi elements. So here I am inside Cinema 4D, and here are all the folders within Sci-Fi elements. And let me just go ahead and start off with a tile. So inside the tiles folder I'm gonna use a tile hexagon. Alright, and let's make sure this is centered. And inside objects, let's close this. And let's use a MoGraph cloner, right? And I'm gonna switch this mode to honeycomb array. And for orientation, I'm gonna use Z. And here I'm just gonna try to use the size, width, and height to try to match these right into position. So let's just change these values until they match. So something like this works fine, it looks alright. Let's go ahead and go back to our content browser, and let's go inside platforms, and let's add a platform 1. So this is a hexagon platform, and you can see this is, well, the tiles are too small, so let's go back inside the object. Let's select the cloner for the tiles, and let's scale this up. Maybe even more. So I want the one tile to sort of match the size of the platform itself. So something like this. Let's go ahead and go back here, and let's add a wall to this. And let's add a wall hexagon. Alright, so this is a hexagon wall. Let's make this a bit smaller, so scale this down. Let's go ahead and select this cloner with the tiles. And let's increase the, rather decrease the count width and increase the count height. Alright, so something like this should be fine. Maybe let's increase the cloner even more, so the tiles. Let's maybe try to match the tile size with the actual platform. Alright, so this kind of makes more sense. So this is a really good start for now, and let's say that maybe for this tile I want this centerpiece here to be a little darker. So I'm gonna shut off the cloner here, and let's make this platform invisible for now, and let's select this tile hexagon, so the original object, and I'm gonna go ahead and select this object right here in the middle that I want to change the color for, and I'm gonna go to view and go to scroll to first active. Alright, so this will give me the body underscore 2 object, and here I can select its material, so click it here and it will highlight in the material window. So now I can select this material here and go ahead and go to color and maybe make this a little darker. Alright, and maybe decrease the reflectance, so I don't need this to be as reflective. So now when I turn back on the cloner and unhide my platform, now we have a darker hexagon tile, right? So I just want to create more of a separation between the platform and the tile floor. Alright, so you can do this basically with any material. So for example, if I want these lights to be red, I can select them here, go to view, scroll to first active, this will give me the lights. Here is the material, highlighting it in the material editor, double click here, and I can simply select another color for this. So if I want the lights to be red, I can make them red. Alright, let's undo that for now, and let's go ahead, and the final thing that I want to add is a display. So in the displayed folder here I can add a display underscore 2, so this element here, and let's bring this up and try to match it to be right on our platform, and maybe even turn this around just so it's facing the camera. Alright, and you can see that this display already has a placeholder here for the actual screen, and I can go ahead and look for this material here in the material editor, and I can double click it, and for example now I can change this texture to be whatever image or video you want to use. So go to load image, So for example, if I want to use this image, I can import it and hit no here, and now you can see it updated here. All right. Let's go back and let's also create a really simple camera animation, and I will start by adding a target camera into the scene. Let's set the camera target to be where our display is, or the center of our screen, and let's add a circle in the scene, and I will drag this forward and rotate it 90 degrees horizontally. Press S for scale and scale this up, and I will use this to animate my camera, and I will bring this up a bit and maybe scale this a bit. Alright, and then I will simply add a Cinema 4D tag, align to spline tag for my camera, and as spline path I will use this circle. Alright, so now I can use this circle to control the camera motion. And let's go inside our camera, and let's create our starting point for the camera. Alright, so I'm simply dragging this circle up, and you can also use the coordinates for this. So I can use this position Y, and I will go inside the object tab and increase the radius maybe. Alright, so this will be where my camera will start, and I will add a keyframe for the radius and a keyframe for the position Y, and also a keyframe for rotation B, which controls this movement. Alright, so maybe around here will be a good spot, so add a keyframe for rotation B. Let's go to the end of my timeline, which is 90 frames, and let's turn this around and add a keyframe. Let's also make our camera move downwards a bit, so control the position Y and add a keyframe. And in object, let's decrease the radius just so it's closer to our screen, and add a keyframe. Also, I will go inside the camera options and add coordinates. I want to change the rotation B and give it a slight tilt, just so it creates a more interesting effect. Alright, so now if I preview this, we get something like this, and this will be fine for our purposes. Let's go inside our display tool, and for user data, you can see that you have a option for completion here, which you can animate. So you can animate this display sort of coming in and doing this cool transformation. And I will also add a keyframe for 0% completion at maybe frame 9. And let's finish this transformation at frame 70. Set this back to 100 and add a keyframe. You can also control the rotation for this as well, and this is also animatable, but I'm just gonna use completion in this case. And let's turn this back to 0, and let's preview this. Alright, so a pretty basic animation, and you can go as complex as you want to, but this will be good just to give you an idea of how everything works together. So let's set up our HDR right now. So I'll make a new material, and I will drop a sky object, and I will add this material to the sky object. And for the material, I'm gonna use turn off color and reflectance, turn on luminance, and then import my HDRI, which I will put a link to in the description of the video, so you can also use this HDRI if you want to. Alright, so now I have my HDRI, and let's preview a render real quick by pressing Ctrl and R. So this is actually looking fine. Of course, we will still have to set up the actual render, and we're going to use physical render, but this will give you a rough idea of how everything will look. And I will also add a compositing tag for the sky object and hide it uncheck seen by camera, just so it's invisible and we're only using its reflections. Alright, so press Ctrl B to go to your render settings, and here I'm going to use physical, and for physical settings I'm just going to use sampling quality of medium, and ambient occlusion will help a lot with this type of render. So right click here and select ambient occlusion. So I also want to use multipass for this, and I will turn on multipass. And passes that I want to use, so I want to use separate passes for the lights. And let me jump out of the camera real quick. So I want to set up some object buffers for the lights for this platform, and maybe the lights in the back here. Alright, and here I can just simply select the lights in the viewport, go to View, scroll to First Active. So here I have this lights object, which I can right click and add a compositing tag, and inside object buffer I can enable, and this will be buffer 1. And let's also maybe change the material for this light to be gray, just so it's easier to use color correction inside After Effects. And also do the same for this guy here in the back. And actually, if I drop down the wall hexagon 1 group, I can go to Elements, and here you can see that you have a lights object as well. Let's also make these lights gray. Alright, and also use a compositing tag for these lights and enable object buffer number 2. And the final thing that we will add is a depth pass. So I want this camera to have the focus object to be the camera target 1. Alright, so now the focus will be constantly on this display here in the center, as you can see. And the details, I'm going to go to details and enable DOF map rear blur, and maybe increase the end point here, or just drag it in the viewport, and this will just help give us a nice depth of field pass, which we can use to create some depth of field blur. Alright, let's go back inside our camera, press Ctrl B for our render settings, and for multipass let's select our depth pass and our object buffer 1 and our object buffer 2. And for our second object buffer here, just type group ID, set this to 2. Alright, and then we can save our, choose our paths here. And I'm gonna go ahead and choose our paths. And the only thing we need to do is set the format to be, use PNG, and make sure that you turn on alpha channel and straight alpha. And also set our multipass to be PNG. So now all I have to do is set up the file paths, and then I'm gonna let this render and jump inside After Effects. Alright, so here I am inside After Effects, and I'm gonna go ahead and double click inside this project window and import all of my files. So double click, and here I have my first render, and then drop this into the composition. And let's also import the depth pass and my first object buffer, so object buffer 1 and object buffer 2. Alright, so here are all of my passes, and this is the main render. This is how everything looks like. Let's go ahead and start off with some slight color correction. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a curves to this, and just increase the contrast a bit, and maybe go to my blue channel. Let's raise the blue shadows here, and maybe decrease the red highlights. Just give it sort of a bluish, reddish kind of tint, just so it's a bit more interesting. And let's go ahead and maybe start off with our first light pass. So the way I composite my lights is I drop my light pass into the comp, and here it is. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab my first layer. So this is my main render, and this will be my lights 1 pass. Alright, just so we keep things more organized. I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate my main render layer, and I'm gonna set this the alpha matte, the track matte, to be luma matte for the lights 1 pass. Alright, and in case you don't have this option here, just press F4. Alright, if you're seeing this, just press F4, and this will give you your track matte information. Alright, so now if I solo this layer, you can see that I've used the lights pass to sort of cut out everything else aside from the lights from our main render layer. So pretty cool. Now what I'm gonna do is, let's unsolo this, and I'm gonna grab these layers, and I want to create a pre-composition just with these two layers. So grab them both and press Ctrl-Shift-C, and this will create a pre-comp. And let's rename this to lights 1. Alright, and with this layer, so essentially the same layer as before, but we're only dealing with one layer. So now we have access to some other options now, and the thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set this layer to be add. All right, so you can already see how we're using the alpha path to sort of create more brightness for the lights. And now we can also add a color correction tritone to this, and I'm gonna set the midtones to be a rather saturated dark blue, and I'm gonna go ahead and add a stylized glow. I'm gonna leave this glow as it is and Control D to duplicate this glow. And for the second glow, I'm gonna just increase the threshold here. And let's take a look throughout the timeline. Alright, so this is pretty cool. And one other thing I like to do with my lights is this is a bit too on the color side, and what I want to do is I'm gonna go ahead and grab this lights layer and Control D to duplicate, and for this guy I'm gonna remove the tritone effect and the second glow effect, right? And essentially what this does is just brings a bit more white back into our lights. It just makes them feel, in my opinion, a bit more realistic. But we still get the sort of like the glowy blue radius around our lights, but inside the actual lights area we just make them more white. All right, and let's do the same process with our second object here. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the second object buffer, so these guys here in the back, and let's hide our first lights for now. Go ahead and duplicate the main render layer, set the main render to Luma Matte for object 2, grab them both, Ctrl Shift C to pre-compose, let's rename this to lights underscore 2, and essentially let's also just grab the effects from the second pass for our lights, so the tritone and the two glows. Right, just select one effect and press Ctrl A to select all effects. Press Ctrl C to copy, grab the second lights layer and press Ctrl V and set this to add. You can see here that we're not really seeing our lights come out, and we can fix this by adding a color correction curves. And I will set these curves to be above our tritone and just increase the curves brightness here, just until we get until we can see our lights pass better. All right, and then I will also duplicate this layer again and just get rid of the tritone and maybe the second set of glow. All right, and if I want a bit more white, I can just decrease the glow threshold for this effect here. So you can see that without this second layer that gives us our white, we just have this blue radius around the lights, and this second layer will just bring the white back into our lights. Let's unhide our second lights. Alright, so looking good so far. What I want to do now is grab all of these layers, Ctrl Shift C to pre-compose, and I will name this, let's see, geometry. So now everything is neatly organized in one single layer. Now we can go ahead and drop our depth path, so 2_depth in this case. And before I add the lens blur effect, we will need to pre-compose this layer. So go ahead and select the depth layer and Ctrl Shift C, and let's rename this to depth map. And I will hide this for now. Go to the geometry and let's go to effects, blur and sharpen, and we're gonna choose camera lens blur. And for our blur map over here, we will use depth map, so our layer that we've just pre-composed. And now you can see that we have in the background here some nice depth of field effect. And we can of course increase this, so let's use maybe 10 as radius, so you can see a pretty good effect. You can see here that we are having some issues at the border area, and we can fix this by going to edge behavior and selecting repeat edge pixels. Alright, so if I take a look at some frames here, everything is working as it should. And one more thing we can actually do with the depth fast. So the problem I'm having now is I kind of want more separation between the platform here in the center and the floor, and maybe even the wall in the back. And we can use this depth layer to kind of create this separation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this geometry layer, and I'm going to set this track matte to be luma matte for depth matte, and I'm just simply going to set this to be multiply. And now this second layer, this duplicated geometry layer, will look at the depth matte, which is this layer, and wherever it's white, it's just gonna be a little bit darker, right? So if I just hide this and unhide this, you can kind of see the difference this makes. So now I'm just creating a bit more separation between the platform and the rest of the scene. And also, if I, for example, go to my depth map and add a color correction curves, and if I mess around with the curves here, you can kind of see how we can control this effect. Alright, final thing here will be to add a background, so let's press Ctrl Y and make a new solid. Drop this below our geometry layer and just simply add let's select this layer and go to generate ramp, set this to a radial ramp, and let's move these points around. And my second color will be maybe like a nice more desaturated blue, and our end color will be just dark. And let's reposition this a bit. Alright, so just until we get something that looks better. Alright, so let's create a simple ramp preview by pressing numpad 0. Alright, so not bad. Now obviously this is pretty much the bare bones scene you can create by using this pack and just very slight compositing in After Effects. And you can see how quickly we were able to create a rather complex scene in just a few minutes. And then with just a couple of touches in After Effects, we can create an actual fully functioning scene. Alright, so hopefully this will give you an idea of the ways you can use this pack, and just a little insight of my workflow exporting renders from Cinema 4D to After Effects and some of my compositing tips. And in the future I will be making a more advanced tutorial, because honestly we've just used 4 objects to create this whole scene, and give you more tips on how to make it look even better in After Effects. So keep your eye out for that. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.